Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Reaction Show. My name is Andrew Velez. I'm here with my co-host, Mr. Joel Dehls. Listen, you know why we're here. We have to talk about our studs and duds.
Do we know
But,
why?
but we really know why we're here to sit down and talk about football on this glorious Sunday. I'm repping my boys. Joel, before we get into it, I'm gonna get ahead of myself. I know how I am. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing fantastic. Even though we've been together all weekend long, still seeing you without a beard does not feel right. Even though
No.
I've seen it, I've been 24 hours in. But good, man. It was a good football Sunday. Your Broncos got the win. The Jets somehow won a game. You've won 5 in a row now, right? 5 in a row in our
5 in a
main
row,
dynasty league.
baby.
So we talked about it after week 3. Like, if you're 0-3, it's not over. Drew's living proof. He's 5-3 now. After this week, he's going to be probably second seed, I want to say,
Yep.
or maybe first. I don't even know. In our main league. So props to you. But yeah, I mean, let's get into it. You got the Denver Broncos jersey on, or the sweater. You've gotten a lot of heat this year. You said there's only a few games you want. This was one of them, going up against the Kansas City Chiefs at home. Absolutely dominated Patrick Mahomes. So let's hear it from you.
I said it 2 weeks ago. I said, you know what? We're in Kansas City. I'll give it to those guys. They got it. They'll probably beat us over there in Kansas City. But I said, I promise you, 2 weeks from now, I will be sitting there and I will be picking my Denver Broncos to break the 16-game streak that the Kansas City Chiefs have had on us since I was in high school. The last time we beat them, I looked like this. That's how long it has been since the Denver Broncos have beat the Kansas City Chiefs. But I believed. I believe not only when we signed that man, Mr. Russell Wilson, to that $245 million contract. I not only believe when we brought in Mr. Sean Payton for a first-round pick. I believe because I'll never stop believing in my boys in that blue and orange. And what happened today was straight up beautiful. You're going to tell me that we beat the Kansas City Chiefs with Russell Wilson outperforming Patrick Mahomes 3 touchdowns? He did fumble the ball. I'll give him that. Let's not say he didn't turn it over. He did. However, 3 touchdowns, and then the real MVP of the squad, that defense, and Vance Joseph go out and don't allow Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs to score a touchdown. Are you kidding me? This is how we get our first win against Patrick Mahomes? I was through the fucking moon. We were getting to him when you were sacking him. We were making him uncomfortable. He throws turnover after turnover. We forced 5 turnovers in total. It was everything I could have asked for. And now here we are going into the bye week, 3-5. We got Buffalo coming off the bye. But this defense, don't look now. Last 3 weeks, it's looked completely different. It's one of those that you look at that first 2 weeks of the season and you desperately wish you got them, because things could be looking a lot more different right now with a 5-3 record as opposed to what we are at 3-5, where you had the Raiders and you had the Commanders, 2 winnable games. But you know what? Let's not live in the past. We can only live in the moment right now. And all I'm living right now is my truth that the Denver Broncos beat the Kansas City Chiefs. And not only did we beat them, we embarrassed them. We send that ketchup-eating prick back home to Kansas City to go wallow with his steak and his ketchup and his... Let me relax. Let me relax. I'm getting ahead of myself. Regardless of the fact, we looked fantastic. We were amazing. And Patrick Mahomes was not. We're here, baby. Broncos country. Let's fucking ride.
Big win. Big win. I'm excited for you. Hey, you even discredit yourself a little bit. You could have 3. That Jets game was well in reach too, where
That's
you had
true.
you had to drive at the end outside of that fumble, where the score ends up being multiple possessions. Like, you had to drive at the end to go and potentially win that game. So I kind of wanted to do like a fantasy reset at some point where you could kind of look at the overall picture and be like, oh, well, this player's a top 10 running back, but the last 4 weeks he's been like wide receiver or running back like 25. You do the same thing with football, where like it's very easy to get lost in those first 2-3 weeks of the season, because you have this whole off season and you finally see these games. And to start the year, the Broncos defense was, on pace to be historically bad. But like you've mentioned, these last 3 weeks, 2 going up against the Kansas City Chiefs, this has been an elite unit. I mean, I don't want to sit here and overreact to like just the 3-game sample size, but 2 games going up against Patrick Mahomes, which the 1 game in between the Denver Broncos, he had 300 plus yards in a single half. And when he goes up against the Broncos, these last 2 matchups, he has not looked like the same quarterback. You guys have absolutely shut down. And, for all of the shit that Vance Joseph has taken over this past month, he's really bounced back. And, getting those, as you say, locker room cancers out there with Randy Gregory and some of those guys. You got some younger players. Got some younger players in there. You could see you're playing with juice. You're playing around. It seems like they're playing confident. They don't really care about those first few games. They don't care if they give up 72 to Miami. A loss is a loss, whether they give up 70 points or 9 points. So right now, the defense looks great. Offensively, I mean, I feel like you're still want a little bit more. Russ, the 3 touchdowns is great, but only completing 12 passes. And Javonte, 27 carries, which was amazing to see. Only went for 85 yards. So not the most efficient game. But overall for Denver, you should be thrilled. This is one of those games you wanted. It's one of the ones that you said, this is my Super Bowl. And, we put Kansas City. I think we all had Kansas City ranked number 1 in our power rankings. And I even had a tweet today saying like the Bengals are going to be high in my power rankings this upcoming week. There's no football team right now that's like leaps and bounds better than everyone else. Kansas City lost to Denver. 2 of these last 3 games, they have not looked great offensively. You can include the Jets game in that too. You have the 49ers with the 3-game losing streak. You have the Eagles, who are probably the best out of that bunch, but they still don't seem like phenomenal, especially that defense. That secondary is terrible. Sam Howell at one point was like 24 of 28. He was unbelievable today. So you don't really have like this dominant team. And Kansas City, like I mentioned, who we all put number 1 in terms of power rankings, I'm not looking at this team or really any team in the NFL saying like that's the runaway favorite. That's the obvious team that any given week they're going to go in and should be able to win this matchup. And this is another example where divisional matchup, maybe there's a little bit more there, but you're going Denver, Kansas City. I didn't give Denver much of a shot. I said I'll be shocked if they win this game.
You're a fool.
They proved me wrong. 24 points, held Kansas City to 9. So credit to them. That was a big win.
I got to say, man, I haven't had many great days as a Bronco fan recently. But today,
one of them.
Today, man, October 29th, 2023 will go down in the history books as the moment that changed everything. I'm ready for a full turnaround. I'm 100% ready.
Buffalo after the bye hurts a little bit.
But if we're going to catch Buffalo at any time, it'd be right now.
That's true. They got Cincinnati this upcoming week. So that's going to be, I'm sure they're looking at that. That's the one they're most focused on.
And we got a bye week. We got a whole week of preparation to get ready for a whole extra week of preparation.
Are you in Buffalo?
To get ready for Buffalo. We need to be ready, and we will be ready for that game in Buffalo. But regardless, in Buffalo, if before I get too crazy, we're gonna have a whole other podcast tomorrow. Yes. You guys see the name of the title. Yes, we're going to talk about Will Levis, where a star was born right in front of our eyes. Of course, I'm just exaggerating, but he put on an unbelievable debut, over 250 passing, 4 touchdowns. The guy was special in his debut, but we're here to talk about the studs and duds. Before we get into it, if you guys like what you guys are listening to so far, do us the favor, like this video. If you guys are not subscribed to the channel yet, please hit that subscribe button, turn the notification bell on so you guys know when we're going live and when we are going to drop our next video. If you guys have any questions at the end of the show, we're going to be doing waivers towards the end of it. If you guys have any start sits, I know it's early. It's Sunday. The week's over. But again, if you guys have any future start sits, leave them in the comment section once this video is over.
Yeah, and make sure to follow us on socials because like tonight's game, it's Chargers Bears, right? Drew and I were talking. We're like, listen, we love making content for you guys. If we don't have to record at midnight, we're not going to, right? So there wasn't a ton that we were looking at this from a fantasy perspective. Probably the biggest thing I'm going to be looking at is just the running back usage between Roshan and Deion Foreman. But other than that, we're not too, fantasy inclined to really recap that game. So make sure you're following us on Twitter, on our socials, because we'll let you know if we're going live at halftime, before the game, after the game. Because barring some big matchups, we might be going a little bit earlier just to benefit our sleep schedule.
And for that, the podcast is at Pick Aside Pod. Joel's is at Joel Dehls. And mine is at Andrew with 5 A's. But now, without further ado, let's go on and move on to the quarterback studs of the week. Quarterback one, Sam Howell
None
does
other.
it again
Is he
versus
the
the
real
Philly.
Blake Bortles? Is he the real Blake Bortles award?
Here's the thing. You know what? I feel like giving him the Blake Bortles award is more respect to him than taking it away from Jordan Love, because he is a fantasy dream.
Yes.
He has been in multiple weeks in the top 10. We have quarterback 1, quarterback 8, quarterback 5, and some other solid finishes, quarterback 13, 14, and 11. You're right. This might be the real Blake Bortles award winner. He continues to be fantastic. Throws for 4 touchdowns, throws for almost 400 passing yards, finishes with 32 fantasy points. He is going to continue to do this in this offense with Eric Bieniemy calling the shots. You have Terry McLaurin. Finally, we see Jahan
After we
Dotson
said you
have
could
the
drop him a
blow-up
few weeks ago.
game that we have been waiting on. There is so much offensive talent in this game, and he is a big play machine. He's fun to watch. Joel says this all the time. He knows that it's the truth. He may not be the most clean quarterback, but in terms of big plays, he is just a big play waiting to happen. And statistically, you see it week in, week out. He has a pretty low floor. That's the truth. But he has a very consistent ceiling. Got to respect that there. Of course, you have the usual guys. You have the Josh Allen. You have the Jalen Hurts also cracks into the top 5. He's been a fantasy dream. You want to talk about one of the reasons why I've gone from 0-3 to 5-3. It's been that man right there.
I looked at his finishes today. It's insane. Like
You
everything
know what?
is like, I don't think he's been worse than quarterback 10 since
Has
like
not
week
1 been quarterback 1 yet.
Yes,
But
correct.
how can you be upset when outside of week 1, 4, 9, 6, 3, 2, 5, and 5? That is insanity.
Yeah.
And it's been great because at the same time he's been answering naysayers with I can't draw back as much as the Patrick Mahomes, as much as the Trevor Lawrence. I can't do that. I'll show you that I can do that this season. I can be one of the most effective passers in the game. And we see him consistently dominate week in, week out. Those for over 300 yards yet again, 4 passing touchdowns. He's going to be a top 3 finish. That is almost guaranteed at this point in time. Dak Prescott finishes as the top 3 quarterback this week going up against the Los Angeles Rams. Now, I ask you this question because there may be a little bias in my heart. I say that as, again, this 5-3 team that I've gone on this run, Dak's been along for the ride. I've been there through the lows. I've been there through the highs. Talk to me. Dak Prescott, are you buying this recent trend upward?
I definitely think it's not going to be as bad as it was to start the season, right? To start the year, we're talking about QB 29, 17, 18, 19, 25. He had that Chargers game where he finishes as QB1. And this week, as you mentioned, quarterback 3 on the week. It's definitely somewhere in the middle. I don't think he's going to have those finishes where he's in the teens and the 20s consistently. But it is hard to hold up, top 5, top 3 finishes when you're not running the ball a ton. He did have 40 yards against the Chargers, but overall, we know Dak Prescott's not going to be rushing for 600-700 yards. It's really just in this Rams game, 4 touchdowns is going to go a long way any given week. So
Absolutely.
We've seen Tony Pollard, and he's going to be in our dud section. Tony Pollard has not scored a touchdown since week 1. For whatever reason, around the goal line, whether it's the opportunity or the effectiveness of Tony Pollard, he's not able to get in the end zone. And them being the Cowboys, have had a ton of red zone issues this season. Some of that lays on Pollard, some of that lays on Dak. But what we've seen these last couple of weeks is they've been able to capitalize on those. And if Dak Prescott's able to turn those either would be Zeke touchdowns in years past, or this year would be Tony Pollard touchdowns, and kind of steal them in a way and turn them into his own, that's going to be great for fantasy. So it's hard for me to sit here and say that you could trust him as a top 3, top 5 quarterback. But I think where you drafted him, which was probably around QB 10, I think that's the type of production you should be able to expect going forward. He's got Philly, the Giants, Carolina, Washington, Seattle. I mean, the schedule, there's nothing scary about it, right? Carolina and Seattle have been pretty decent against quarterbacks, but Philly, the Giants, Washington, those are some dream matchups.
Giants, I can't say
they've improved. That's fair. They have improved.
They've really done a good job recently. But outside of that, Philadelphia, Washington, Seattle, Philadelphia again, Buffalo At this point in time, we've seen their secondary with the unfortunate injuries that it has faced in Trey White, and of course, not in the secondary, but Matt Milano and what he means to the defense as a whole. We see that they could be a little bit vulnerable on the defensive side of the ball. And then in the fantasy playoffs, you have Miami and Detroit. Call me crazy. You said top 10. I think 100% where he's a top 20 right now. He is ranked the 20th quarterback in fantasy football. When it's all said and done, we're talking about a top 8 quarterback in Dak Prescott. The trend started with that Chargers game, but with how easy the schedule is rest of season, with how clean the offense has looked, we're starting to see Brandon Cooks now get incorporated into the offense a little bit. CeeDee Lamb, who we're going to talk about in the studs most definitely, we're seeing him start to cook up. This offense, particularly this pass offense, has really started to come to fruition these last couple of weeks. And I know it's against the Chargers and the Rams, who the Rams have been a little bit more respectable, of course, than the Chargers. But again, with the slate of defenses that Dak Prescott is going to face, we're looking at a top 8, top 7 finish with Dak Prescott, in my opinion.
Yeah, because those first few weeks were tough. I mean, he was going up against the Jets, San Francisco, New England's still been a tough defense for fantasy. So, like you said, with these matchups coming up, you should feel confident. It's just because you went through all of them. I think really only week 15 at Buffalo. That's probably the only one that scares me. That's a December game. The weather could be bad, the wind, whatever it might be. But outside of that, if Dak's in a plus matchup, he's shown these last 2 weeks he could produce.
And the last guy who cracked the top 5, your guy, Mr. Joe Burrow. I think that it's about time that we state the fact that Joe Burrow's back. He looked the
great.
healthiest that he has looked so far, going up against this San Francisco defense. Listen, we've been adamant about this. This San Francisco defense is not unstoppable. It's actually very beatable. We've seen that these last couple of weeks. Joe Burrow throws for almost 300 yards, 283, does get into the end zone 3 times. I really believe very firmly this is the start of Joe Burrow back to being the Joe Burrow that we have become accustomed to.
Yeah, he's got Buffalo next week, so that's gonna be another test on the road,
sure.
I believe, too. But the biggest thing was obviously the health was there, the touch on the ball was there. But he ran multiple times. I mean, I'm not sure how many rushing yards he had off the top of my head, but I watched every snap of that game. There was multiple times where he was taking off, he was running for first downs, he was not sliding, he was going head first to pick up those extra yards to get those first downs. And then you saw the big plays, like you saw touch balls to Jamar Chase, who was double teamed on the left one time and just perfectly right in the breadbasket. Another beautiful ball where it was a fake wide receiver screen to Higgins, and Chase goes for the touchdown, which was wide open, but still just like absolutely perfectly placed. So he was super efficient today on the road in San Francisco. That bye week, it looked like it helped a ton. So the health looked there. They were a bit more under center more too, because they were basically primarily in shotgun these last few weeks, trying to give Joe Burrow just a little bit more time to heal that calf and not have to, you hike the ball and automatically have it step back 4 or 5 and put a lot of pressure on that calf. So you can see just in the play calling, the formations, that he's been healthier. And then the play backed it up. He looks sensational.
Yeah, 6 for 43 on the ground. That's really what we've been missing from Joe Burrow. Not so much so the rushing and getting his rushing yards, but his ability to escape the pocket and allow plays to develop. That's where we start to see them really take those deep shots, because that's what we've known from the Bengals. Closing out these top 10s, of course, Tua is going to crack the top 10. Like, we're just going to see it every single week. That's a formality at this point. Now, depending on what league you're in, Taysom Hill, he cracks the top 10 as a quarterback. We do know that in majority of leagues he is at tight end, but Sleeper does have him listed as a quarterback / tight end. So maybe you can take that to your advantage. Either one, if you're in tight end leagues, or 2, if you're desperate at quarterback. Yeah, if you're really desperate, I should say. But in tight end, he becomes a cheat code because of how versatile he is. Josh Dobbs, again, fantasy is amazing, where you may not have the best game in terms of real life, but you go in fantasy football and you could be a top 10 finish again. Josh Dobbs has been pretty fantasy safe. Quarterback 7, quarterback 13. We've seen him finish as high as quarterback 5, has had another quarterback 8 finish as well. Kyler Murray is rumored to return next week, week 9.
No, already.
Now it's week 10.
Gannon came out and said that Dobbs will play next week, so it looks like Kyler week 10.
Okay, that's great to see. Listen, I'm maybe I'm in the minority. I love Kyler Murray. I want to see him back out on the field. But again, you know what is in store for the Cardinals this season.
They also have
Sit
Cleveland
Kyler
next week.
Murray. This is
How are they
your
looking
this
at
is
that?
your franchise guy. Do yourself the favor. Let's not rush him out there just to see how he looks. Don't put him in a position to fail. Although we can give credit, the offense has looked solid under Dobbs. I have no worries that Kyler's going to come out here and ball, but they're not playing for anything big picture wise. Look for the big picture next season and wait for Kyler. But talking about Josh, he continues to be great for fantasy football, and he's a great story nevertheless. Now, the guy who we're here to talk about, the name of the video, Will Levis, 238, 4 touchdowns. What is there to be said other than how the hell did this happen? Is he serious? What a
It was
performance from the kid. He goes and you have the mentality that every young kid should have. Where is my number one guy? We've been waiting for Ryan Tannehill to abuse this method. We haven't seen it so far. We saw Will Levis be more explosive in one game than we've seen in almost a year and a half of Ryan Tannehill. He was nothing short of sensational. And when we have our discussion on the waiver wire pickups, I'm caught, man. I mean, if you're in a 2 quarterback league, he looked that good against a Falcons defense who really has done
respectable.
a great job this
Yep.
season. He made them look regular. And for that to be the case, and for that really, you have a DeAndre Hopkins. Treylon Burks had a look, but I think he was just out of bounds. That cost
Yeah.
that could have been a big play. The ball just kind of just
Sailed on
leaned a
him.
little bit towards the sideline on him. But if he's going to be able to make these big time throws and push the ball down the field like this, I'm not saying he's going to throw for another 4 touchdowns. But again, if he can continue to have those big plays, listen, it's not crazy if you're in a 2 quarterback league to spend 50% of your fab with the injuries that we saw to a Kirk Cousins. If you're really that desperate, he played against a top tier defense and he was able to do this to them. What is he going to be able to do in these next upcoming weeks when the matchup is Pittsburgh, who's been solid, Tampa Bay, Jacksonville, who's been one of the more forgiving secondaries, Indianapolis, Miami? I mean, these are some solid matchups. Again, maybe you have to see it for one more week, but with the injury to Kirk Cousins in a 2 quarterback league, you're going to have managers that are desperate to spend money, see a quarterback throw 4 touchdowns in their debut, and overspend. So don't be one of those that is a little stingy and you miss out on the opportunity of one of the bigger plays on the waiver wire.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't honestly, you don't have the luxury. You don't really have the luxury of waiting a week. If you want Will
No,
Levis, you have to go this week. And like you said,
absolutely.
50% of your fab, you have to be ultra aggressive if you want to get him, especially if you're in a 2 quarterback league. He looked great, man. I mean, that first touchdown, DeAndre Hopkins, D Hop got away with the OPI
For
like
sure.
crazy. Well,
For
but we'll
sure.
take it fantasy points or fantasy points. His second touchdown, no, his third touchdown seemed like just a breaking coverage, got wide open. But I mean, those are throws I've seen missed by even
You're
Lamar
right.
Jackson in recent years, where
For
it's
sure.
wide the fuck open, but you still got to hit it. He had another nice touchdown, another deep touchdown. Not to DeAndre Hopkins, maybe Chris Moore was it, or Westbrook Keen. I forgot who it
Off his
was.
back foot too,
Yeah,
bro.
and
Just
just
the arm
beautifully
talent was
placed
unreal.
back left corner of the end zone type. And then he had the other touchdown was to DeAndre Hopkins over the middle of the field, where it was a pretty tight window. And he was stood in the pocket, delivered a strike. D Hop did the rest, broke a tackle and got into the end zone. So what you saw from Will Levis is everything you wanted to see from a rookie quarterback, right? We're not going to sit here and say that he's going to be the next franchise quarterback or anything, but this was someone who, pre-draft was getting top 10 buzz. He was getting buzzed to even go in the top 5 potentially. And of course, there's risers and fallers as draft day goes on. And he was one of the biggest fallers, fell all the way to the second rounds. And Tennessee, I believe, traded up to get him. Malik Willis did play some wildcat here and there, but this is Will Levis's job now. I mean, Malik still may come in for a couple of snaps just to show the defense something different. But what Will Levis showed this coaching staff is that Ryan Tannehill is expendable. It wouldn't surprise me by Tuesday if Ryan Tannehill is off this team. You could get him for a mid-round pick. I don't know if Minnesota is going out and trade for him just because it feels like their season's kind of over at this point. But any team, maybe the Jets or whoever it might be, if Tannehill's available, I would be listening to those calls because I want to see what Will Levis has the rest of the season. You saw what this Tennessee Titans offense looked like for the last 5-6 weeks. Going into that Ravens game when Tannehill got injured, it looked terrible. they were not able to do really anything offensively outside of that Bengals game where they put up 24 points. But you have to be excited. DeAndre Hopkins was my set of the week. That's an L. He looked phenomenal. And Will Levis not only looked great for real life, but for fantasy football, and we kind of hinted at this too when I said to sit him, I was like, you might have mentioned it actually. Like Will Levis has that kind of mentality saying like, fuck it. If my guy's down there, I have the arm strength to just throw it up and hope D-Hop can make a play. Now, thankfully, outside of that one touchdown, D-Hop was open, right? Especially for that other touchdown. But he has that type of mentality. He has the type of arm strength where he's willing to take deep shots. He's willing to take that 50-50 chance. And that's what you love to hear from fantasy football, right? That's when we saw that Jameis Winston type season with Mike Evans was going crazy when he had the 30 interceptions. But who cares, right? If he's going to take those shots, you want to get those potential fantasy points. So very excited for what Will Levis, what lies ahead. And I agree with you, though. If you're in a 2-quarterback league, you have to get aggressive. You know, we're in week 8 going into week 9 now. I'm sure Fab is very limited. I'm sure you have, you're probably staggering.
Talking from experience.
Talking from experience, whether it was a running back that went down or you needed a flex one week or defenses throughout the year, whatever it might be. I'm sure you're not loaded with Fab. But if you need a quarterback, I would not call you crazy if you're saying I have to spend all of my Fab money. I have $30 left. I need a quarterback. Go out and spend it, because what he showed is that he can produce at a high level of fantasy.
No doubt. No doubt. Let's move on to our quarterback duds, Mr. Dehls.
Yes, sir. So we have 4 duds, really 3. I just want to talk about, really 5. I just want to talk about 4. 2, I don't really care about. Patrick Mahomes, we talked about, had a bad game, only 250 total yards, 2 interceptions, no touchdowns.
Loser.
But it's Patrick Mahomes. Who really cares? And Lamar Jackson, 174 total yards, a touchdown, interception.
He's going to be okay.
Gus Edwards had 3 touchdowns. Lamar does kind of oddly. He has 5 He has 5 finishes in the top 10, but 3 finishes as QB 20 or worse. So he has had a few weeks this year where week in and week out, we're trusting Lamar as a top 5 option, but his bad games tend to hurt you pretty bad, especially if he's not able to get into the end zone. Like I mentioned, Gus had 3 touchdowns. So those 2 I don't really care about. But the other 2, I'm curious.
Question real quick before we move on. Was one of those games against Pittsburgh also?
Yes, probably.
Which makes sense.
He should have gone crazy, but didn't. The other 2 I do care about. Matt Stafford got injured in this game against Dallas. The first half, 160 yards, a touchdown, interception. At first, it was like a wrist or a hand, a finger. It looked like there was a couple different injuries he was dealing with. But what's interesting is that they have Green Bay next week and then a bye in week 10. So there's a strong chance that they want to be cautious, sit Matt Stafford through week 9, give him an extra rest week 10 through the bye. Because 106 yards and a touchdown, one half of football, Stafford was probably on his way to being in the stud section. But the fact that he got injured and Brett Rypien had to finish the game, this is where he lands. So if he does or if he doesn't play, I guess going forward, we're going to talk about the other Rams receivers in the dud section because neither of them had a good game. But I guess how do you kind of attack this Rams offense without Stafford? Is it you probably still have to start Kupp and Puka?
Absolutely.
But obviously their ceiling gets limited without Stafford.
So watching the game, you saw once the second half started, we saw this offense start to click a little bit. We saw them incorporate Darrell Henderson into the offense through some check downs. They made some nice screens, and they were able to move the ball and score some points when the game was really out of hand. I believe it was 33-3 at one point. They brought it to 33-17. Stafford was still in the game. Then it got to a point that Stafford got taken out. I think that's once they kicked the field goal. It was out of reach. It looked as if they were taking the precautionary route because the game was already too far gone for the Rams to really make that full comeback. I'm going to be interested to reading reports when we have our Thursday show and we do our injury conversation at the end of the show. He's definitely going to be a name to look out for, but he's Matthew Stafford, and we've already seen him so far this season champ through an injury. He's one of the toughest, most resilient players in the NFL. But Joel made an excellent point talking about with the bye being week 10, do they want to take the precautionary route, sit him week 9? I'll live in 2 worlds. One right now where what we've seen from Matthew Stafford of being a warrior, going back out there, if that's the case, you're happy. You throw Puka, you throw Cooper, you don't think twice about it. Even a Darrell Henderson, who showed you can get some check down work. I feel very comfortable starting him as more so RB2 flex play. But without him, it gets tough. I definitely am with you. I think you start them both regardless. but we're leaning with Cooper Kupp being with the Brett Ripien being the quarterback is really hard for me to evaluate. Puka becomes maybe if you have a guy like a Drake London or a Puka, where I have that situation of I can start either Drake, I can either start Puka. With the way that Drake London's been getting targets in that situation where Brett Ripien's my quarterback, I might feel a little bit more comfortable going the Drake London route just because I know he's going to be the first targeted, where with the Rams, it's going to be Cooper Kupp. And Cooper Kupp becomes the safer play of the two.
Absolutely. The other player I want to talk about was CJ Stroud. Stroud was not at his sharpest today. 140 yards, no touchdowns. These last 3 weeks, 14, 14, and 12 fantasy points. And again, when we're talking about Denver's defense earlier, CJ Stroud got off to that insanely hot start. And I think we both agreed, like, listen, this is probably a plug and play quarterback 2 going forward. But now that these last 3 weeks have gone by, and he's still real life, obviously, I think he's looked really good. But for fantasy, hasn't really produced the touchdowns in these last 3 weeks. Only 3 total touchdowns, 1 interception. Thankfully, he did have a rushing touchdown today too, so I should say 4 total touchdowns. But I guess going forward, Nico Collins didn't have a great game. He's probably more matchup dependent, right? You're looking for a matchup he can exploit. You're looking to go up against a not so great defense. And I don't know if he's so much a must start going forward.
Yeah, this was one of those where sneakily the Panthers' pass defense has been solid. Kirk Cousins was terrible against them.
Struggled.
But Jared Goff was really the lone guy to truly dominate this offense, scoring 3 touchdowns, almost 240 passing yards. And Tua as well, he had himself a clean game. But going up against Geno, going up against Kirk, going up against Derek Carr, they really shut down those quarterbacks. And now going up against a young quarterback in a CJ Stroud, they were able to limit him tremendously, where I felt that Bryce Young was the better quarterback today. Mm-hmm. He made more timely plays. He made more winning plays, and they were able to win their first game of the season and Bryce Young's first win in his career. So I don't know if in 2 quarterback league, I still feel comfortable starting him. He definitely is not my favorite play, but again, with how many injuries we've seen to the quarterback position. 2 quarterback, he's a must start. And quarterback 1, you're 100% right. He's nowhere near a must anymore.
And then the last person I want to talk about, not that he's a dud, but we have to, is Kirk Cousins. So likely towards Achilles. They're going to wait on an MRI tomorrow to confirm. This sucks. This is terrible. Horrible. Minnesota, it's really just the balancing act of the NFL, where last week after San Francisco, we're high and mighty saying they can make the playoffs, right? Like, Justin Jefferson says that he's feeling good. Like, he's going to come back in a couple of weeks, and who knows, the schedule is light. Now he goes down. Taylor Hall, is that the backup, right? Mm-hmm. Hall's the last name. I don't know if that's his right first name, but the bigger impact though is Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson as well, where, you're not going to be starting Hall really ever, even if you're desperate, play a receiver or running back at your second quarterback spot. Hopefully you have a super flex. But for those guys, Jordan Addison, who's been amazing this year, and Justin Jefferson, we know how special he is. Without Kirk Cousins, I mean, you're still starting Jettas. He's the best in the game. You're still starting him once he comes back from injury. Jordan Addison's been so damn good that I want to start him, but I don't feel good about it. It doesn't feel good to put him out there with a backup quarterback. There's an off chance Minnesota, trades for a quarterback, tries to make maybe a wild card push. But it's hard to say. The trade deadline's in 2 days. They're going to have to make that decision awfully quick. And then still, you're going to have to get someone in here. They're going to have to learn the playbook. They're probably not going to be ready to play for a week or 2. And Jefferson is still probably at least 1 or 2 weeks away from returning. So terrible situation all around. Feel terrible for Kirk Cousins, who's going into free agency kind of with a question mark over his head in terms of, is he going to get still that, $40 to $50 million crazy contract? We were talking about the 49ers last week. I know Joel mentioned that. Just feel bad because, obviously he's a great guy.
Yeah, Jaren Hall took a couple of snaps. Through only 4 passes. So there was not much to evaluate on him in this game. The game was already Minnesota's. They won it far before he got into this game. And it is devastating and heartbreaking because the work that Kirk Cousins puts into his game. You see the clip of him being put onto the cart, and he's still focused on the game. He's still cheering on his guys. He is such a selfless individual, and it's truly heartbreaking when when things like this happen to such a great individual. And you saw the Minnesotas, like you just mentioned, you saw the tides changing. We back-to-back weeks of dominant offensive play. I know that we don't look at the Packers as one of this dominant teams, but they look damn good against a division rival. And you mentioned Jordan Addison being a stud and one of the top candidates for Offensive Rookie of the Year, how special of a season he's having. And without Kirk Cousins, the ceiling on all of these players becomes so much lower. And it's truly unfortunate because we really were starting to see the change of guard with the Minnesota Vikings. Moving on to our running back studs, Christian McCaffrey, another week, another finish at the top. He's unbelievable. He sets the record, or I believe ties the record as of right now, for consecutive touchdowns scored with, including the playoffs, 17 weeks in a row. He's in a tier of his own. I continuously say this, the best fantasy football player, not at the quarterback position, I've ever seen. He's unbelievable. Number 2, Gus Edwards. Now, this is an interesting one because of the inconsistency that we see at the running back position with the Baltimore Ravens. And even last week, we don't have the snap count out yet for him this week, but last week, where he was a top 10 finish, he only saw 50% of snaps. This week does get 19 carries, does rush for 80 yards, very efficient, scores 3 times. Now, moving forward, are we treating Gus as a must start? Because these last 2 weeks, it seems as if the backfield's his.
Yeah, and I mean, it's important to note too that they were in Derrick Henry discussions, but that seems to be going nowhere. It seems like Derrick Henry is going to be staying in Tennessee. I'd be interested to see if they make maybe a smaller move to a different, pivot to a different running back. But yeah, these last 2 weeks, RB6, RB2, he continuously is around that kind of 15 carry mark. Doesn't really get much work in the passing game still. He's going to be touchdown dependent. These last 2 weeks, he got a touchdown last week, 3 touchdowns this week, and he's like, wow, 2 top 10 finishes. But these last 5 weeks where he's getting about the same opportunity, he's RB 47, 35, 37, 37. So it's really, boom or bust. Is he going to get a touchdown? If he does, we're talking about probably a top 15, top 10 running back. If he doesn't, for a player who really gets nothing in the receiving game, it's kind of hard to trust him. But again, we've talked about it all season long. The running back landscape is disgusting. So there are far worse options out there. Gus Edwards obviously should be rostered on every team. And if you have to start him as an RB2 and an offense which is as prolific as his Baltimore, rushing attack, offense in general is, I think I'm fine starting him as an RB2.
Rounding out the top 5, it's 3 names that we've become very accustomed with: Alvin Kamara, Travis Etienne, and Breece Hall. Those 3 continue to solidify themselves as 3 of the best running backs in fantasy football. Breece Hall, with just a freak of nature at 50-yard touchdown. How he was able to score on that, where it's a hitch route, he turns around, is able to make a defender miss and just blow by the defense.
But this is important to remember because this is going to look like a bad game of fantasy against the Giants defense. Breece did nothing on the ground. I mean, last I saw he had like 11 carries for 18 yards. I don't know what he exactly finished with, but
17 for 76.
I'm sorry, for rushing.
Oh, I apologize. You're 100% correct.
Yeah, but exactly. He had a 50-yard. That means 26 total yards outside the 50-yard touchdown, right? Yeah, so the Giants, this is going to look like when we go and we're like, oh, they allow the 5th most fantasy points against running backs or whatever. This is going to look like a bad fantasy game for the Giants because they let up that 50-yard touchdown and he gets, the 6 points of the touchdown, 70 plus total yards. But this Giants defense absolutely shut down the Jets rush attack. All of these opponents going into the week know we have to stop Breece Hall. Some can, some can't. It's important to know the Giants can, and they did. So these upcoming games, when they look like an easy opponent, and you mentioned it too when I talked about easy opponent for opposing quarterbacks too. This Giants defense has changed, similar to the Broncos, where this is a respectable defense now. You should not be going into every week thinking it's going to be a cakewalk.
100%. I apologize. Read it incorrectly. Did have 76 receiving yards on 9 catches, but 12.
He had 9 catches.
Yeah, he had 6 catches, 9 targets. Apologize. Okay, I'm all over the place. But then had 12 rushes for 17 yards. You're right. Yeah. Was not really effective on the ground, but Zach Wilson doing what needs to be done, seeing the check down, allowing your star players to make plays. He was sensational. Joe Mixon gets into the top 10. This was surprising to see.
That
Had him
week.
had himself a ball game against San Francisco. Austin Eckler now gets back into the top 10. I feel like we're going to start to get more acquainted with Austin Eckler and top 10 conversations. Rashad White sneakily makes himself into the top 10. And the name I want to talk about to wrap up the running back studs is going to be Derrick Henry. Now, quietly, Derrick has 3 top 10 finishes. He also has 2 other finishes within the top 15, but we haven't seen him be this consistent, dominant running back that we've known him to be. He has a week like this where he goes for 22 attempts, 101 yards, but then you go to a week against Baltimore where he also is a top 10 running back, but only gets 12 carries. So is it more so, are we trusting that Derrick Henry's Derrick Henry, or is the inconsistency enough for you to use his name as a valuable trade piece?
That's an interesting point. I don't think how am I so I think Derrick Henry, I think his name and his trade value are probably about even right now. I don't think we're going to be getting the top, 2 or 3 finishes we've seen in years past, just because the days of him getting like 28 to 30 carries don't seem like that's realistic anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You look at a couple years ago in 2021 before he gets hurt, we're talking about
God bless
35, 28, 33, 29 attempts, like just some really insane work. And this year, he does have a couple finishes or 3 games over 20 attempts, but for the most part, 15, 25, 11, 22, 13, 12, 22. He hasn't been getting the workload, really the Derrick Henry-like workload that caused him to be a top 3, top 5 running back year in and year out. Tajay Spears, the snap percentages change. It feels like every week. Some weeks he's getting completely involved. Some weeks he's completely phased out. So it's hard to predict when that's really going to be. It's just going to be hard for me to say trade away Derrick Henry unless you're getting an upgrade at running back. Right now, he's running back 15 on the week. He's going to get the work around the goal line. He's probably still going to be good to 15 to 20 touches. And he's still explosive enough to rip off 30 to 40-yard touchdown plays where he could still outrun guys. He could still run over guys. So barring a situation where you could take Derrick Henry and, a flex-worthy player like a Zay Flowers or something like that and turn him into a Austin Eckler, who I still would have over Derrick Henry rest of the way, or, a Breece Hall, maybe something like that. But if you're not getting an upgrade at running back, there's just so few options out there that I could, I could say that you should go and trade Derrick Henry.
And the last thing I want to mention real quick before we move on to the running back duds, Saquon Barkley. If you want to talk about abused, look at what happened to Saquon Barkley. 36 attempts, 126 yards. They ran into the fucking
36 attempts. We're going to have some, there's already some interesting comments around how Brian Dable kind of handled that second half in the overtime period. I definitely think there had to be a happy medium. You have Tommy DeVito out there, never played in his life, played some preseason, and you have Saquon Barkley, who's Saquon Barkley, but at some point you got to throw the ball. He was just running screens in overtime, and they got nothing going. So I understand that you don't want him to make a mistake, but you're also 2-5 coming into this game. It's like, let it fucking rip. You have a chance to win a game. Who knows how many opportunities you're going to get when you're going up against an offense that's not going to be Zach Wilson. Besides the point, we'll probably talk about that on tomorrow's show. Moving on to running back duds. Tony Pollard is up here and probably the featured name of the list. In a game where the Cowboys scored like 1,000 points and they were going crazy offensively. CD had a great game. Dak was not the same case for Pollard. 12 carries for 53 yards. As I mentioned earlier, he has not scored a touchdown since week 1. And there was definitely some comments preseason, and I even bought into a little bit that, there's a world where Tony Pollard could be the dark horse RB1, right? We saw how efficient he was behind Zeke. Now he's getting the full workload. Those days seem to be behind us. He's probably a high-end RB2 without a doubt. But the fact that he hasn't scored those touchdowns on the goal line is probably the most worrisome. Ramondre Stevenson, after back-to-back weeks in the top 15, does not have a great game. 10 carries for 39 yards, only 2 receptions. So, we want to buy in after those 2 games, but the truth of the matter is the offense is bad. And when he's not getting looks, he had 4 targets in this game. It's going to be hard for him to overcome really anything. Kenneth Walker was dealing with that calf injury coming into this week, and he got outsnapped by Zach Charbonnet. Only 8 carries, did go for 66 yards, so Kenneth Walker was still great. I don't think this is going to be don't think it's going to be a long-term thing for Zach Charbonnet where he's just going to take over. I think Kenneth Walker is the better running back, but he might be valuable for the next couple of weeks if Kenneth Walker is going to take him a while. The truth of the matter is they're probably going to work into each other's workload enough that it's going to make both of them less efficient for fantasy, right? Like if they're going to be splitting work instead of Kenneth Walker getting basically everything and Charbonnet basically nothing, they're probably both going to be like wide or running back like threes if Kenneth Walker is going to get limited to 8 to 10 touches. Aaron Jones, who's dealing with that hamstring injury still, basically identical stat line to the previous week. He had 7 carries for 29 yards, 4 receptions, somewhat saved his day, so it was an absolute dead finish around 8-9 fantasy points. Coming into the week, LaFleur said that he's not 100%. He said that the hammy's still not all the way right and that he's going to get limited until he is right. It's difficult. You mentioned it. Those soft tissue injuries are the worst to deal with, and we're seeing it now. Aaron Jones injured this hamstring in week 1. He sat out some time. He came back. He sat out again. And now we're going into week 9 and Aaron Jones still isn't right. So probably impossible to trade him away and get any sort of value for him, but also someone I'm probably not looking to trade for. The other names I want to mention, Dameon Pierce. We've talked about him. If he's not getting touchdowns, it's not going to be great. Jerome Ford dealing with that ankle injury, surprise play, but he was not really used much. 9 carries, still average over 4 yards per carry. Last one I want to talk about is Miles Sanders has officially lost his job. Chuba Hubbard, he was terrible, 15 carries for 28 yards. But Miles Sanders was basically just not on the field. 2 carries, 0 yards. They paid him all of this money. I made a small trade with our boy G. I traded Charbonnet for Miles Sanders. He has Kenneth Walker. And I was like, you know what? They gave him the money in the offseason, coming off a bye. Maybe he's over the injury. Maybe he could take back and be a, mid to low end running back too. I don't really know what to think because Hubbard was terrible. He was not good, but Miles Sanders isn't even getting work. You always want to trust the money and say, like, Miles Sanders got the contract, so he should get all the work, but he looked terrible too. So this might just be a complete hands-off situation in Carolina.
Yeah, not a great running back situation by any means over there in Carolina. But I was shocked that Dameon Pierce did not have himself a better ball game, especially with how poor we've seen Carolina's rush defense be. Dameon Pierce got stuffed at the goal line what seemed like almost 5 different times, just could not punch it in. Could have saved his fantasy week. Nevertheless, couldn't get a job done. Now, we're on to the wide receiver studs. And last week when we had this segment, I told you guys, it's the same names over and over and over again. We see A.J. Brown in the top 5, Tyreek Hill's in the top 5, Jamar Chase, CeeDee Lamb, some surprise names in the top 10. Jalen Waddle has himself his breakout game of the season.
Welcome to the year, Waddle.
Love to see that, where he actually statistically had a better game than Tyreek Hill. That was crazy. But and Waddle even tweeted it after the game. He goes, "That's the cheetah effect." You see the attention that Tyreek's getting. It's going to allow for looks for Waddle. It's going to allow for Waddle to get these open looks. And with Waddle kind of nursing a nagging injury, he had something happen to him again in this game where he re-aggravated his back injury, was able to play through it. But with Tyreek Hill being as amazing as he is, and as slowly we see Jalen Waddle start to get back to his form, we're going to see Jalen Waddle get to around where we were expecting him. Maybe because of how poor he was in the beginning of the season, maybe he won't finish as that top 10 guy that we saw last year. But slowly but surely, we've seen him get into the end zone this week, again, getting into the end zone, but having over 100 receiving. Now we can start to have the conversation of him getting back into the top 15. Spoke about it. Jahan Dotson, he was droppable. He gets into the top 10, finally has the game that we were waiting. Of course. I'm buying it because I love drinking that Kool-Aid, man. He's a special player. And of course, I'm only joking. If he's on your waiver wire, he shouldn't be. You should go pick him up. You could probably get him for relatively cheap. But 108, 8 receptions, a touchdown, 10 targets. We've seen the targets come his way. We just haven't seen it result in production. So that was great to see. Wouldn't be a show if we didn't mention John's guy, Rashid Shaheed. He has 3 catches, goes for over 150 and a touchdown. That's good enough to get you into the top 10.
He's got to use him more.
I was going to say, bro, he's talented as fuck, dude.
He's so good.
He's very, very good. He's more than just a fast guy. And even if you want to just say he's a fast guy, he's faster than the majority of the DBs that he's going to go up against, and he wins a lot. And it's just going to be a matter of getting him the rock. Last name I'll mention, Smitty. Amazing bounce back
Hey,
week. We were having worries about Devonta Smith and whether or not he was startable, but he goes, puts that to bed. 7 receptions, 99 yards, gets into the end zone. He was fantastic. Again, this pass offense of the Eagles has been great and really unexpected, where we anticipated that the rush offense would primarily be its bread and butter, but no, we've seen them be a prolific pass offense. Now, Joel, before we go on to the wide receiver duds, I want to do something. I have 5 receivers. I want you to rank them rest of season. Some will be a little bit more obvious, the others will be not so much. So it's going to be a blind ranking, all right? So we'll
okay,
start
okay.
off with the first name, CD Lamb.
Uh, so just 1 through 5, you're saying, right? You're gonna give me
1
5
through 5,
names.
you got to
Okay.
put him in a spot.
CeeDee Lamb, I'll put number 2. I think you'll give me one person better, but CeeDee Lamb
Okay.
right now, I mean, these last 2 weeks, he's been sensational. There's just the very slight back of my mind, like, is Mike McCarthy and Dak going to keep this up? But CeeDee Lamb has all the talent in the world to be a top 5 receiver fantasy.
All right. Next name I'm going to throw at you, Jalen Waddle.
Waddle's tough because as you were talking, I was thinking to myself, do I use this week and try to flip him? Right? I've been Loki. He's been on the trade block. I've been out there just feeling
He's
offers. No one's
available?
really biting.
He's available.
Everyone's available for the right
Oh,
price.
okay.
Jalen Waddle, I'd put at wide receiver 3 on this list. He's still,
Okay.
the explosiveness is there. He's on one of the best offenses in football. So this game where finally it's a game where he puts up the stat line, gets a touchdown, even outproduces Tyreek Hill, it might seem like that's never going to happen again. But this offense is so great that it can happen again.
Joel, I fear you may have screwed up. Next name, Cooper Kupp.
I'm cooked. Okay. Unless I could put him at 1 still.
You
I could
could.
put Cooper Kupp at 1. Listen, we're going to talk about Cooper Kupp in the duds. I can't put him 4. No way. So I will put him 1 here. I will put
Okay.
Cooper Kupp 1 here. I'm not buying into these last couple of weeks where he's just been complete duds. We saw those first 2 weeks when he was back from injury. He still got it. This is still the Cooper Kupp we know that won a Triple Crown not too long ago. One of the most talented receivers in the NFL and can break fantasy when he's 100% and when that offense is going right. It's right now just a matter of if Matt Stafford is healthy or not.
Next name, Brandon Ayuk.
See, I would have him 3 if I could redo this. But I put Ayuk 4. He's definitely better for real life than he is for fantasy right now. That's just the truth of the matter. Right now, he's a better receiver for fantasy. He's not really getting those consistent blow-up games, those consistent back-to-back weeks with touchdowns, but he still has all the talent in the world to be a top probably 15 type receiver going forward.
And Joel, this is where your list is cooked because the last name's A.J. Brown.
Oh, yeah. Well, throw the list away. AJ Brown, outside of Tyreek Hill, that's the only guy I want. It's AJ and Tyreek. So
once I heard you put Waddle 3, you put Waddle 3. I said, this is not going anywhere where
I didn't know I was gonna get. I heard Cup. I was like, okay, I got my big one. I didn't know AJ was coming too.
That's okay, man. That's all right. That was just for fun. Let's go on to our wide receiver duds.
So let's talk about it. Cooper Kupp, back to back in the dud section. Not something I was expecting after he returned from injury. 4 receptions for 21 yards. The good news is he still got 10 targets, so he's getting those looks. But as we mentioned, Matthew Stafford's hurt. If Matthew Stafford is not playing, Cooper Kupp is not going to be able to put up those 100, 120, 150 yards, touchdown, 2 touchdown type games. And Puka's right here with him. 7 targets, 3 receptions for 43 yards. 2 of the last 3 weeks for Puka, it's been outside the top 50. He did have that 1 week in between where we still saw him. He's still great. We know the talent's there, right? I don't think there's the whole, like, should you move off Puka? Should you trade, sell high? All of this. We know he's talented enough to be a fantasy cheat code, especially because you probably got him off the waiver wire. But you still trust these guys, right? Like, we're not overreacting. We're not moving off Cooper Kupp. We're not moving off Puka, right?
So long as Matthew Stafford's the quarterback, you feel 100% sound that everything's going to be all right. Even still in a game where they got blown out and Cooper Kupp was a quote-unquote dud, still saw 10 targets. He's going to get the ball. That's just what's going to happen because we know the talent that is Cooper Kupp. Without Matthew Stafford, I worry about a guy like Puka, for sure. But with a backup, Brett Ripien will know, my guy is Cooper Kupp. He's going to get his. But if Matthew Stafford's in, we're not even thinking about this.
Couple other names here. Chris Olave, 5 for 46. He did drop a touchdown. Had just like a very strange Chris Olave kind of mental lapse. He's only had one finish in the top 15 this year.
I was gonna
Chris
say,
Olave was
bro,
someone that
he's
I was
been
very high on going into the season, and he's been very disappointing. I still trust the talent, and when you go and watch like this game where he dropped a touchdown, he's probably one of my favorite trade targets if you go out and get him, because he's probably being valued as a wide receiver 3, especially when you hear all of the remarks about Derek Carr sucking and the Saints offense sucking, which I agree. I don't think the offense is good. Chris Olave is better than what he has been. Do you agree with that, or do you think that he might be a little bit the hype he was getting this offseason wasn't warranted?
the worry is we're not seeing him get into the end zone. We know he has that big playability. We're just waiting on it. The issue is Rashid Shaheed is taking all of his big plays. So that's where I have a little bit of conflicting thought processes, where I know the talent's there. I know he's talented. No one should be questioning the talent of Chris Olave. But when we're talking about fantasy football and a lack of production, we can sit down and have a real conversation. But no, I don't think it was unwarranted. I will say I don't love what we're seeing. He's turning into a low-end wide receiver 2, a flex play, just because of the inconsistency.
Absolutely. And I feel like the kiss of death this week, because Zay Flowers was my star of the week. He was bad. 5 receptions for 19 yards. They couldn't do anything down the field. I mean,
No.
it was short. There was really nothing down the field, at least for Zay Flowers, that is. And Lamar was in the dud section too. Just a bad game for a matchup that looked juicy. A matchup where we thought Zay Flowers this could potentially be the breakout game. At the end of the day, he's a rookie. He hasn't been able to find the end zone a ton this year. So he does feel pretty boomer bust going forward. Nico Collins, 4 receptions for 30 yards, saw 6 targets, which is good. But again, CJ Stroud was in the dud section, so Nico Collins is likely going to be in the dud section as well. He's had 4 great games, 2 top 5 finishes, but also 3 games outside the top 50. I think, as we mentioned, these last 3 weeks, CJ Stroud has struggled, even though those aren't all of the bottom 50 finishes. It's just some inconsistency with the offense. First time play caller, rookie head coach. Just take some time. George Pickens, Christian Kirk, and Christian Watson round out the duds. Pickens is interesting because he had the 1 catch, 22 yards and a touchdown. Great play. George Pickens just doing some stupid shit per usual. But it's going to be something I have to track with Kenny Pickett getting hurt. Sounds like he's going to miss Thursday Night Football. And Deontay Johnson's back. This is his second week, integrated into the offense. He had some interesting comments after the game saying the refs wanted the Jags to win. That was pretty funny. But Deontay had a good game. I think he was 7 for 78 for 80, something around that. And we know when Deontay is healthy, he's really the target volume guy. Pickens is the big play guy. Deontay is the one that's more likely to get those 8 to 10 targets. Christian Kirk was a rain game, 4 for 46, not that word. And Christian Watson, 8 targets, which is great, 3 receptions for 33 yards. It's just really the Jordan Love experience, man. It's not great right now.
I'll tell you this, Jordan Love didn't look great. Romeo Doubs gets into the end zone again. Bizarre, dude. It really is crazy how Watson's supposed to be the wide receiver 1. It just seems of him missing those first couple of weeks, it just allowed him to gain rapport with Romeo, who Romeo really didn't have that great of a game, just was able to get into the end zone. I don't know what to make of the Christian Watson situation. I know he's a big play waiting to happen. He's an explosive type of dude, but with the lack of consistency that we've seen from him this season, I get it. You're not playing with Rodgers anymore. That's the truth of the matter. But again, when we talk about fantasy football, we've had conversations about Jordan Love being very fantasy relevant. So it's weird to see him be so more so missed than hit. But again, the inconsistencies have killed you. Absolutely. Let's move on to the tight end studs. Tight end 1. I'll tell you what, he will not be happy if I did not shout him out. Shout out to Big Chuck, who gets shout out more than anybody else that we know.
Trey.
But deserve. Trey McBride is your tight end 1 on the season with Zach Ertz being put on the IR. This was McBride's time to solidify himself, to get his looks, and stamp himself as the tight end 1. He is your tight end 1, not only on his team, but on the week. Goes for 10 catches, 95 yards. Had a unbelievably lit touchdown where the team just carried him into the end zone. It was electric. But I'm very excited. Of course, wanted to give my love to Chuck there. Never was anticipating this type of game from McBride. But got to give credit where credit is due. He was fantastic. George Kittle consistently, let me not say consistently, but of course we know his ceiling is a top 1, top 2 kind of guy. That's what he gave you this week. 9 catches, 149 yards. He was great. Had a drop, but not obviously with that type of stat line. You don't worry about that. Evan Ingram, who was my sit of the week with tight ends, you really shouldn't be sitting the best of the best. But regardless, 10 receptions. He is the most targeted tight end in football. We saw it on display versus Pittsburgh. He did have 10 catches for 85 yards. TJ Hawkinson's in the top 5. Travis Kelce is going to be in the top 5. David Njoku, Logan Thomas had some good games. Dalton Kincaid, we spoke about on our last show. But Goddard, who was your start of the week, does get into that top 10, but with a respectable 8 fantasy points.
Yes, it's getting into that top 10 for that position is pretty easy. I don't have a ton of duds.
Kind with a respectable.
I needed something this week because it felt like everything was opposite. I have Jared Goff going tomorrow that could maybe save me. But the duds, not really a ton here, right? Like basically the guys you were starting performed. Darren Waller got injured in that Giants Jets game really early on. I didn't even see the injury. But it was his hamstring, which we know has been dealing with him going back to last season. He had comments on it a few weeks ago saying that he doesn't know if it's ever really going to be right this season. And he got injured and he got ruled out awfully quick. So something to monitor going forward. Jonnu and Kyle Pitts both weren't that effective. Jonnu 1 for 13, Pitts 3 for 35. Taylor Heineke played in the second half of this game. They said, Arthur Smith said Ritter didn't get pulled for performance reasons. They said he was going through the protocol, but he ended up clearing it, I want to say, but didn't go back into that game. Weird stuff, regardless if it's Heineke or if it's Ritter. We know kind of the outcomes of these guys. They're going to have some terrible weeks, but there's going to be some weeks where they could catch a touchdown or two and be viable. And the last one will be Dalton Schultz, who 2 receptions for 5 yards. As we mentioned with Nico Collins, as we mentioned with CJ Stroud, just a bad game for the offense. And Dameon Pierce, no one really performed.
Now, it is Sunday. It seems a little bit early to do our waivers. But, Joel, if you want to do some waivers, I'm down to throw some names at you. You let me know what you do think. In tight end leagues, Trey McBride, what's the percentage that you're thinking?
Yeah, I mean, last week was the week to get him. We said it. You can't wait, even though I thought he was going to have a bad game. You can't go Will Levis crazy, right? Like we're going to talk about Levis later. I think he's someone, if you need to, throw it at him. But if you have the money to spend, I'm willing to spend probably 30 to 40% probably of my budget to get Trey McBride. He's athletic, second round draft capital. He's just been sitting behind Zach Ertz for a couple of years. And now Kyler Murray's coming back in week 10. That's going to be a big boost to this offense. So Trey McBride is someone who could probably be a top 7 type tight end rest of the way.
Yeah, and listen, you say that we told him last week. We did. If you did not listen, you still have time to right your wrongs. Only rostered in 28% of leagues. So you still have time. I'm leaning more so that 20-25%. I understand how hit or miss the tight end position is. And if you're going to get a guy that's going to be targeted this much, I understand where you're coming from. But we've seen the tight end position be so volatile that he's been solid. I don't know if we can anticipate another week like this, but I understand where you're coming from. Let's stay on the tight end position. Let's talk about Jake Ferguson, rostered in 56% of leagues, did get into the end zone. We've seen him be relatively inconsistent. I just wanted to throw his name out there. If you are in a tight end league, he should be rostered 58%. 56% seems a little bit irresponsible. You should throw some money on that. Throw like $5-6 on him. That should be enough. That should be enough to get him. Now, let's go talk about bigger names. Let's talk about Will Levis. Are we in that 50%? Are we in that upper echelon? If all the money you have of fab, if you really need a quarterback, that's how much you're throwing on it.
Probably. And I mean, it'll probably even change. If Ryan Tannehill gets traded tomorrow or Tuesday, then absolutely 100% because it's Will Levis show rest of the way. If Tannehill remains on the roster, and we're going to know by Tuesday, so we should know before waivers run, which is going to be a good thing. Levis showed a lot. This is a Tennessee team that I think will continue to lose, even though, they got the W today. I don't think they're going to be winning a ton of games. So my gut tells me is that they're going to see what Levis has, use a second round pick on him. They know Tannehill is not the long-term option. He's probably done at the end of the season anyway. So yeah, I'm getting aggressive in those 2 quarterback leagues, especially where either you had an injury, you have a guy underperforming, or you're someone like Max who has no quarterbacks. Be aggressive, go after Will Levis because the upside is worth the fab.
I'm gonna be honest. I think my I lean with you. I'm with the idea of if I need a quarterback and I'm desperate, I'm throwing every single dollar that I own. I can't miss my opportunity here. You saw him be explosive in the first game of his career. I understand that maybe 4 touchdowns is a little bit unreasonable to expect from him going forward. But from what we saw, he was aggressive. He was confident. That's something that I love to see, especially going up against a defense like the Falcons. I feel comfortable spending this money, especially with the injuries that we've seen to the quarterback. Now, as big of a addition as a Will Levis is, in my opinion, this one's almost just as big with how consistent we've seen him over the last 3 weeks. And he's not even rostered in 50% of leagues. I'm talking about Taysom Hill. We've
Mm.
seen him finish tight end 6, and tight end 3 with 12 fantasy points, 17 fantasy points, and 23 fantasy points. With the tight end position and how dog shit it has been for consistency like this, and with the way that if you're just watching New Orleans Saints football, you see that they are drawing plays specifically for Taysom Hill. They will give him the ball. They will allow him to run the Wildcat and just do whatever he wants. He really becomes effective because he's so dominant at scoring near that goal line. Has 3 rushing touchdowns in the last 2 weeks. For me, this guy where I would spend the Trey McBride money that you were talking about on a Taysom Hill just because I feel like this more opportunity is more sustainable.
Yeah, and he's been a cheat code. I mean, this past week, what happened today? He didn't get used in the passing game, 1 reception,
Mhm.
but 9 rushes for 53 yards and 2 touchdowns. The last 2 weeks, though, he's been used as a receiver with 7 receptions and 4 receptions and going for 49 and 50 yards. So he's someone, who probably has eligibility. I'm looking at sleeper, tight end, and quarterback. He's getting
Wow.
used as a tight end, quarterback, and a running back. A couple of years ago when he was just labeled as a tight end and he was playing quarterback those few games under Sean Payton. It was a bit of a cheat code, but he's kind of back to that. Like he's kind of back to those days we saw a few years ago where you were getting just a complete mismatch at tight end. And while he's not going to be throwing the ball nearly as much, if he's going to get 5 to 10 rushing opportunities, and we know how great he is around the goal line too for a team that's been struggling in the red zone area. And then he still has pass catching ability too. So I'm with you. I'd probably rather have Taysom Hill than Trey McBride, just because of all of the different ways the Saints utilize him.
Last 2 names I'll throw at you. Pick a side legend, Rashid Shaheed. Are
Ooh.
you interested in rostering him? Should he be rostered?
Probably. It's tough because he's so inconsistent and you're never going to know when to start him.
Agreed.
So unless you're in you have a team, I'm sure we have a week coming up where like 6 teams are on bye because no one was on bye this week because the NFL is stupid. If you're in that situation where you have a ton of guys on bye, you need a flex play. Since you're missing 3 of your starters, you're projected to lose by 25. Rashid Shaheed could get a couple big plays and put up a 20 ball in your lineup. Then I'm okay with it. But he's probably not someone I want to start on a week-to-week basis.
If you're in like a 12, 14 man league,
Absolutely,
yeah,
yeah.
he's worth rostering. But in 10-man leagues, I don't think that I can trust it just because, like Joel said, you never know which week is going to be his. And I have to throw this name at you. Jahan Dotson, are we back? Is he one of those that we're making a priority this week?
It's funny because we've been shitting on him a lot, right? We said a couple weeks ago he was droppable, but I don't know what the numbers look like right now. But I remember going into the week, like he was right up there in terms of targets. When you're looking at the Washington Commanders, like there were all of them, him, Terry. I mean, Logan Thomas earlier in the year was in that conversation too. But he was getting the looks that we're kind of talking to each other saying like, why isn't he producing? Why isn't he putting up better fantasy numbers? He was such a, such a touchdown guy last year. I have the numbers here. Let's see. Right now, Terry McLaurin's at 51. He has dropped off a little bit. Him and Curtis Samuel are tied for 39 targets on the team. But the difference is Dotson's turned those 39 targets into 22 catches for 180 yards, and Samuel's turned his 39 targets into 31 catches for 310 yards. So Dotson's had the looks. He just hasn't. I mean, and some of these are uncatchable. Some of these are Howell has not been accurate. But Dotson's talented enough that if you want to go off of this week where you saw him get back into the action, I'm okay with that. First round pick. We saw last year as a rookie, he produced. So I'm okay. I'm okay adding Dotson back to my roster.
I'm definitely adding him back to the roster just because that's my
You
guy.
love him.
I fuck
You
with
have a
him.
crush on
That's
him.
my dude. All right, but Joel, if you don't have anything else to add, man, that's gonna do
That's
it from us over here at the Fantasy Reaction Show, episode 17. We're gonna be coming to you. We said Tuesday, we capped. It's
Right.
going to be Sunday nights, whether it's gonna be after the 4 or after the 8 o'clock game. That really decides on how good the 8 o'clock game is. But again, we're going to be consistent with this. Sunday nights, we're going to be dropping. And of course, that regular Thursday night after the Thursday night football. But again, that's going to do it from us. If you liked what you guys have watched so far, go ahead and do you guys a favor. You guys stuck around this long. Hit the like button. Again, if you're not subscribed to the channel, subscribe to Pick a Side. Go ahead and turn that notification bell on so you guys know that when we go live on a Sunday night or a Thursday night, or you just get notified when Pick a Side drops a video. Riv is doing Riv Academy. If you guys aren't tuned into that, go ahead and do that. Joel Moran, of course, he's doing the Joel Moran show. And Pick a Side. We're going to go. I don't know if we're going live tomorrow, but we will be recording the full-length podcast on Monday and most likely around that Friday, Saturday for the basketball episode. But without further ado, guys, have a good night, and we'll see you guys next time.